Majority of the times I start the Jummah sermon with a ayah from the Quran. But today I've been using stories, right, or small fable tales to drive home the point. So today I will start with a small story first to get you to what the actual topic of conversation is today. So in olden times, there used to be people used to travel from town to town and cities to cities, and there used to be long distances. And at those time there were no hotels there, right? So usually you would go to a town, they used to have what is like a public guest house. So they used to have a public guest house where people could go and stay. You used to call it Musafir Khana in India or whatever that I know of, right? You may be familiar with the term where the travelers come, weary travelers, where they have a place to sleep and a place to bathe and rest up before they continue on their journey. So there was one particular town where there was no guest house for the weary travelers. So the town people, said we need to gather enough money to actually, build not one, but maybe we can even build two. So they gathered enough money to build two guest houses in the town. Now, happened to be there used to be two builders who were there in the town. So they had two builders who they said, let's give money to both of them, and let each one of them build the guest house for us. So the first builder, his philosophy in life was that he wanted quick fame and name. So his intention was all about, how fast can I build this place and how showy I can show to people. So because this is a hot topic right now for the guest house, so when I complete this guest house in record time, people are going to praise me and sing good deeds about me. They're seeing how quickly this person get this particular guest house built up. So he decided to go ahead and he took shortcuts on the foundation, right? He used material, whatever he could find, not find, mixed things up. And he finished this whole place in very record time and got it up all done. And it looked flashy, but the foundations and everything were probably not completely kosher. So, but he got a lot of praise from the town people. Say, look, how fast and how quickly did this guy get done? And now we have this guest house, right? That is going there. The other builder on the other hand, his intention was to build a guest house that not only would last the current generation, but would last generations upon generations. So that could be a place where, people could come from for a long amount of time versus something that would be done in a very short time and then the building would be not in good shape. So he decided to actually take the effort. His intentions were clear, so he built the foundation properly. He made sure he got the right material, got everything done. And because he was trying to do things correctly, it took a lot of time to get it done. Now, he, on the other hand, was not worried about the public commemoration and praise that you would get from getting this place done in record amount of time. So he ended up taking longer, right? But then he made sure everything was built properly and correctly. Now, of course, as you look at the story of those two people, one person got a lot of praise, and the other person who did the job correctly and more properly, of course, did not get a lot of praise, of course, out of it. Of course, he got it done in time. Now, over a period of time, what people started realizing was that the guest house that was built in record amount of time, the builder had actually taken shortcuts, so things were falling apart, right? For example, the toilet is leaking, just like happening today, for example. But so you had shortcuts happening and things started breaking down very quickly, right? And that started happening. And then the other guest house, on the other hand, everything was going flawless, nothing was happening, things were working like clockwork. And over a period of time, they realized that the guest house, which was built in record time, actually ended up in shambles and they couldn't keep up with the repairs. On the other hand, the other guest house, which was done with the good intention, that lasted for, dozens and dozens of years. So people remembered it like, hey, look, once upon a time we built this guest house. There's this one which looks like a ruin. And this one, which was built really nicely, has been lasting for a very long time. Now, the point I'm trying to drive home today with this story is that both of them did the actions. No problem with the action. They almost did the same action on the visual level. You looked at two people building two guest houses. But you could understand the difference between the two guest houses in reality was the intention of the two builders who did the work. It wasn't about the work itself, it was the intention that was done. The honest builder who had the good intention in his heart, his amal or his deeds lasted not only him, but lasted for a number of years after that. On the other hand, the person whose intention was not pure and clear, it was like a deck of cards that fell apart the moment wind came and blew it up. And I'm just using a metaphor here as an example. And this is the truth about Islam. Every action that we do on the day of judgment, the action is going to be evaluated in light of your intention. If I am praying, I'm showing up to the mosque 5 times a day, I'm the first one in the line, and I'm the first one when it's time for Ramadan, I'm feeding thousands of people, right? And when it comes to Muharram, I'm donating generously and so on and so forth. But if the intention, right? Because Allah says in the Quran, He says, وَحُسِّلَ مَا فِي الصُّدُورِ, on the day of judgment, when all the actions are going to be shown to you, but Allah is going to look inside your heart and say, along with these actions, what was the intention of it? So if I'm feeding people, being the first in the line, have a long beard, wearing all the proper attire, and my heart is not clean and all my actions are not for qurbatan ilallah, meaning for the pleasure or for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, my actions are going to be useless on the day of judgment. And that goes for whether it goes for namaz, prayers, whether it goes for fasting, right? Whether it goes for when you go for Hajj, right? Any action that you look at in Islam, right? If you don't have God or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as front and center, where you are doing actions for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all your actions in this dunya are going to be waste. Because Allah says in the Quran, right, that we have sent you to test you who amongst you is the best in deeds. But the quality of the deed is only a function of what your intention is in your heart. And this especially becomes very important in salat, in namaz, in prayer. Now, I did promise some of you people before that, last few weeks I've been focusing a lot of stuff on emotional stuff. So today I'm going to talk a little bit emotion, but bring it into a little bit of fiqh there, right? So we'll talk about prayers, right? Prayer is the foundation of our religion. Everything that you do in Islam, this is as-salatu, umudud deen, right? Salat is the foundation of the religion. But the fundamental thing in salat is your intention. If your intention is not there, your whole salat is useless. So let's talk about intention, niyyat. It is important to know that if you don't have the niyyah in your prayer, your salat is batil, your salat is gone. You miss your intention, your salat is gone. Now, what does intention mean? Like, what does niyyah mean? Does it have to be spoken? Actually, no. You don't have to speak your intention when you're actually doing the prayer. But however, if somebody is praying and I catch hold of them and say, hey, what are you doing? Right? His answer should not that somebody's going to grab you and ask you while you're praying. But if somebody asked you and grabbed you while you're praying, your answer should immediately come out that I'm praying for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's called the intention. That's called your niyyah, per se. Now, it doesn't have to be spoken. Like I said, even the thoughts are enough, right? There is no necessity for details in the prayer. I've seen a lot of people, say things like, I'm praying namaz, 5 rakat, 4 rakat, maghrib, 3 rakat, qurbatan ilallah, which is fine, right? But it's not necessary to actually spell out the intention. As long as you know you're praying maghrib prayer, right, and you're doing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it actually is fine. It must be done out of purity of heart, right? And what does purity of heart mean? Qurbatan ilallah, right? Which means you are doing it to seek closeness to Allah subhanahu. Whatever action you're doing, when you're doing that action, the niyyah is that I'm seeking closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it also means that I am the servant, right? And Allah is my Rabb, He is my master. So when you're praying, you should always have this feeling. That's why we say iyyaka na'budu. Now, when you look at English translations in of the Quran, when somebody says, if you read all the English translation, most of them translate as that, we pray to you only, right? The problem with that translation, that's actually not completely correct, right? The acknowledgement actually is that iyyaka na'budu, meaning we worship you only. We are your servants only, right? So that means that Allah is our master, we are Allah's servant. So you pray with that intention in your heart when you are praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, intentions are of different types when you're praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes people are praying for the Jannah. I'm praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because I want to go to Jannah, right? It's there, right? Or you are praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what? For avoiding the punishment of fire. Right? I don't want to go to Jahannam, I don't want to be punished, so Allah, I'm praying to you, please save me from the fire. The third type of person is the one who prays out of just thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Thanking Him. Now, of course, we can thank Allah no matter how much we try or how long we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We even the Imams and Prophets are actually not capable of thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the full extent He deserves. But the thankfulness in your heart actually is the feeling that you need to have. Now, all these three things I described are actually different levels of worship that Imam Ali describes in one of his hadiths. He says that the person who prays to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the desire of Jannah, his prayer is like that of a trader, a merchant. The person who prays to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so he won't be punished from the fire, that person's worship is like that of a slave. And the person who thanks Allah is really seeking closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, realizing that he is the servant and Allah is his master. And Imam Ali then goes on and closes the hadith by saying that I don't worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the desire of his heaven. Neither do I worship him for the fear of his fire. I worship him because I have found him worthy of worship. So, by the way, in all of these three cases, there is nothing wrong with the intention. Because in each one of these cases, these are all acceptable by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The only issue is that these are different levels of worship. And the best level of worship is where you are doing it to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the niyyah should be maintained during the entire prayer, right? Which is what I was talking about, right? When somebody says that, what are you doing? You should be able to answer, I'm praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, it's hard to actually maintain the niyyah all the time, right? You're praying, all of a sudden a thought comes in, the pot on the stove I left it on, right? Or I forgot to pay my water bill, right? Or somebody told me something today, right? And your thought goes somewhere else, right? So it is important to try to keep that. The only thing is that your niyyah should not get polluted. Your thoughts will waver all over the place. Happens to a lot of people, right? But the niyyah should not get polluted. Meaning what? That your niyyah, there should be no riya in your niyyah. What does riya mean? Meaning that if you are doing prayer to show off to people, or that's one, just showing it off. I was talking about it earlier, right? Or where you are doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where you're also doing it to show off people. right? Where Allah may be primary and showing off is secondary, or showing off is primary and Allah secondary. In each one of these cases, your namaz would become batil. I had said your attention can get diverted, but your niyyah should always be clear that you're doing it for qurbatan ilallah. Now, doing a prayer perfectly. Allah has ordered us in the Quran because we are judged on our actions, right? At the end of the day. So if you pray your namaz perfectly, right, niyyah is good, takbiratul ihram is good, qiyam is good, ruku, sujood, tashahhud, salam, all the things that you needed to do for prayer, you did it perfectly. Bodily action, saying things out loud. Now, in that case, your namaz will be accepted. But the one who gets the reward is the one who does it where he maintains his niyyah during the entire prayer. And that's where you get the sawab of the actual prayer. So if you want a reward, then that intention needs to be maintained. You can actually make mistakes in reciting the prayer. There's so many places you can, and it's still okay. But if you pollute your niyyah, then that becomes a problem. However, the niyyah should, if you can maintain it during the entire prayer, you actually get reward for it. On the other hand, if you just do the prayer right perfectly, and you don't get punished for it because your actions actually matter in there. Now, it's important to know what that concentration means. So when you're praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, number one is paying attention to what you're saying. A lot of times I see people, just recite all the surahs and so on and so forth, right? But, when you're saying subhanallah, 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 right? What it means is you're actually singing the perfection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you say subhanallah, you're acknowledging Allah's perfect. However, a lot of times you go in ruku, you go in sujood, you say subhanallah, you move on, but that feeling doesn't come. That feeling, the acknowledgement, paying attention to what you're saying matters, right? And that is the feeling that you should always have, that you have fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you should also have the acknowledgement that you're going to get the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And always pray. And this is something, I try to tell myself, it's a hard thing to maintain doing it all the time. And it's something I would advise you is that when you're praying, always pray that if this is your last prayer of your life. Because who knows, I could be sitting here 2 minutes later outside, what would happen? Or during prayer. So if you wanted your last, let's just say if this was your last prayer, how would you pray? Now be quiet there for a few seconds, right? And I can see the thoughts going on in your head, right? And I can see it in your faces. If this was your last prayer, how would you pray? Would you pray just subhanallah, 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 ruku, sujood, tashahhud, salam, Allahu Akbar, done? Or would you carefully think about every word you're trying to tell Allah subhanahu? Big difference, right? So making sure that you do that, right? Some of the things that will decrease the reward in the prayer, I'll just tell you a couple things. I want to tell you a couple things about Jamaat prayer, so I want to make sure I say that before I end the khutbah. Number one, things that decrease the prayer is actually praying in a sluggish form. I'm in ruku, but I'm just hanging around. When I'm standing, my form is not good, for example. You're standing in front of Malikul Mulk, right? The creator of the entire universe. How would you stand if you were in front of the President of the United States, for example? Not that we care about who it's going to be, but if there was a good person out there, or you would go into the kingdom of the king, the court of a king, how would you stand? This is the King of Kings, right? Number two is praying in a sleepy form, like I'm sleepy, but oh Lord. Happens? Yeah. Right? Praying in a hurry, I got 30 seconds. I got to finish my prayer, right? Because I got to get in the car and drive away. Or I want to just get the obligation done. Allahu Akbar. Or, a lot of times we feel this is something which, is actually very common. Like if you have to go to the bathroom, don't pray in the state where you have to go bathroom. Go to bathroom first, relieve yourself, then come back and pray. Don't be in a physical state of turmoil while you're trying to pray. These are things that decrease your sawab. Things that increase your sawab is actually wearing perfume, better, during your prayer, combing your hair, brushing your teeth. Again, think of this way, wearing good, clean clothes. You're standing in front of the King of Kings. Would you wear whatever and show up as whatever? Makes a big difference. He's closer to you than your own jugular vein, by the way. So Allah is actually close to you all the time, every second. Just a couple things about Jamaat prayer I want to kind of talk about a little bit, right? So the Fajr prayer, the Maghrib and Isha prayer are what are called as prayers that are spoken out loudly, right? Zohar Asr is the silent prayers. When the Imam is actually, if you're in a Jamaat, right, in the first two rakats, the Imam is supposed to actually recite the surahs, not the people following. And so let's just say, and it's for all the prayers, by the way, it doesn't matter. Actually, Fajr, Zohar, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, the Imam, in the first two rakats, the surahs are supposed to be recited by the Imam. You're supposed to, in the loud ones, you're supposed to listen. So Fajr, Maghrib, and Isha, you listen. Zohar, Asr, since it's silently spoken, if you can hear him, then fine, keep quiet. Right? If you can't hear him, then you can recite some other dua. Don't recite the surah because the Imam is doing it for you. Right? And if you want to say a dua, right, say it silently, say it quietly, to the point where it shouldn't reach the ears of the Imam. Ruku, sujood, tashahud, salam, third and fourth rakat, you can recite. But it should be not loud enough where the Imam can hear you. But do not recite the surahs in the first two rakats. And this is something because I lead the prayers most of the time, I can hear, right? And so it's something that I always wish I can say it, but I don't say it often enough. But in Jamaat prayers, you should be listening, especially the Qiyam part where the Imam is standing reciting the surah. I want to leave you with one thing about intention. And take it for whatever it's worth as far as the niyyat part goes, right? Number one is the fact that when you do your intention, you should always have this feeling of taking protection in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in Hadith Qudsi, actually not Hadith Qudsi, there's in the Hadith from Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, which he's saying that it is a hadith that was revealed to Dawood alayhi salam, so Nabi Dawood, and he's reciting this hadith from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, never has a servant of mine sought protection with me and not with anyone from my creation. Never has a servant of mine sought protection in me, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not with anyone of his creation. And I know that from his intention. So if your intention in your heart is that you're seeking protection from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, guess what Allah does? He says, and the heavens and the earth and whosoever is in them plan against him. So the whole universe conspires to plan against you. Your intention is what? Only seeking protection from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the whole universe is conspiring against you. Then Allah says that, that I appointed for him an escape from them. So if your intentions are clear about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will always create a path for you as long as you have faith and tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.